Welcome back. Still with me in the studio, Stephen Barker, who's Head of Home Loans at Standard Bank, and from our bureau in Cape Town, Laurie Wener, MD of the Western Cape region for Pam Golding Properties. That's what we're looking at. We're looking at the property market. Laurie, let's go back to you here. This whole thing about instant gratification, which I mentioned going into that break, there surely is, because of the mindset of the present generation, there surely is a possible problem in the offing here where people are simply buying what they won't be able to afford down the road.
That's become more difficult since the NCA has come into play, and their affordability is far more strictly controlled by legislation now. And it's not just what you earn, but what you spend that comes into qualifying a buyer for a certain amount of money. I think that to a large extent has saved South Africa from the huge credit crunch that was experienced worldwide. It is not that easy to overbond yourself now. One word of warning though for first-time buyers, as Stephen said earlier, the interest rates are not going to get any lower, so make provision for increased mortgage payments on your mortgage. And also, when first-time buyers buy, they need to know that many of the costs inherent in the sale and taking transfer, such as bond costs, certain rates, have to be paid up front, and they cannot draw that down from a mortgage loan before transfer, because that mortgage loan is not registered. So they need to make provision for those pre-transfer costs. A lot of them say, well, I've got a 100% bond, or I've got a 90% bond, and I need to pay the costs out of that. They cannot do that. They need to make other provision. They need to do their homework. They need a good mortgage broker. They need a good agent to help them calculate those costs up front.
Okay, I'm going to come back to something Laurie brought up there. You grant a loan to me now at, well, I don't even know what the home loan rate is, more or less.
So generally, no longer in the sort of prime less territory, you'd be doing well at prime, but loans are generally marginally above prime.
Okay, so let's say it's 1% above prime.
Yeah.
I remember when I bought my first property, I think the interest rate was 21%, and it went up to, I think, 23%. What happens if you grant that loan now at prime plus 1, and in, I don't know, 8 years' time, the interest rate is sitting up at 17%? As much as Laurie is saying you've got to do your homework, who is actually doing their homework on a, let's say, a 15% interest rate? Nobody's doing that.
I think the way you'd have to look at it, absolutely right, but there's other ways to potentially think about and solve that problem. So the first thing is, with the interest rates at the moment, our interest rate views, and generally in the country, I don't think people expect as extreme increases in these interest rates. But is it possible to see interest rates go up 50% from where they are today, which could translate into 50% increases in mortgage over the life of the loan? Absolutely so. So from a bank perspective, we generally find selecting our customer, and if you find somebody that's generally of good risk, that even through those interest rate cycles, they would perform better. But if you're sitting here as the consumer, you can start to, I guess everybody when they first get into the mortgage, the first year, 2 years, generally, everybody finds it tough. Whether you're the first time home buyer, you've done this a few times. But that's where, my key advice would be start to, as soon as you get that next increase, start to pay in a little bit extra into that bond. Because a little bit extra and a little bit of the extra buffer means that when that interest rate starts to come, you're sitting on a substantially lower balance. And so that impact of that interest rate won't be something. So over a 7-year period, you could have actually made quite a big dent into that mortgage up front. With sort of increases, you could absorb a lot more. But if all it is you pay the minimum of the mortgage, find other ways to spend all the cash, it will leave you tight when those rates do go up. So I think it is one of those things that is a long term, and the key thing is build a bit of buffer, but also I think there's a buffer by being conservative, by building and prepaying your element of mortgage, because that will give you more room to play with.
Laurie, you're on the ground. Are younger people, first-time home owners, do they understand what paying a little bit extra into your bond over and above what you're supposed to can effectively do to bring down the duration of your bond and the amount of interest you're saving? Do they get that?
It's difficult to generalize. I certainly think that a good portion of them do. If you show them figures, it's quite amazing. It demonstrates it. I personally think something should be added into the school curriculum to educate youngsters on simple property, contractual law, and financing a home. It's education, and I think that there is a gap in our education system that doesn't actually equip people for these early stages of their lives. And when you actually show them, and we as an agency do encourage people to max out on the repayments of their mortgages and not use their mortgage to finance every car and swimming pool. We do encourage them, and I mean there is a history of very high interest rate in this country. And people need to be educated. They must remember that they need to pay their mortgages off as quickly as possible. So there is an awareness. To what extent, it's difficult for me to comment over the whole market, I have to say. But certainly banks and estate agencies and schools should try and make the people, especially first-time buyers, aware of this.
Do you guys work closely together with estate agents and property developers and that sort of thing, or is there sort of?
No, so generally we're in this, we're in the same sort of business, and there are particularly links because of the processes of how you originate a mortgage all the way through. So I think the answer is yes, but not necessarily that we continually combined on certain elements, but we are within the same value chain. So, we do understand what's happening in the different sections of the market.
Where do you see the market going?
So, if we looked at it, the way that I'd summarize the market, if we think of it from a growth perspective, there are two ways to look at it. And I think we always talk about asset growth and how much my property's gone up. I don't think on the overall market you can expect much there. I think in the long run, if you see property as an inflation guard, that's probably where, people's mindsets should be. And I think that's where we are at the moment. So is there certain downside risk? We believe fairly limited, but at the same point, we're not expecting, stellar growth, type answers. So what we've seen in the last sort of 2 years, I think we can expect that to sort of continue for the next little while.
Does what Stephen says sort of link into your thoughts on this particular issue?
Yes, I would say that I do agree with that. We do see certain pockets where we're seeing more interest, more growth, increased volumes. But I think generally his comments are, we would agree with that.
That is where we are going to have to leave it. Thank you very much for your time. Laurie in Cape Town, Stephen in Johannesburg. Thank you for joining us in the studio. And thank you for joining us. We'll catch you next time around. Bye-bye.